Welcome, everyone, to Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth. My name is Andy Steele. I'm happy to introduce you to Tony Szamboti. Tony is a mechanical engineer from the Philadelphia area with over 20 years of experience in the aerospace industry. He designs structures for aircraft, spacecraft, and support equipment. The title of Tony's presentation today is An Objective Look at the Collapse of World Trade Center 7. So before he begins, I just want to remind everyone that YouTube defaults to a low resolution. So if you want to boost your picture to a higher resolution to see the slides and the slideshow, simply click the gearbox beneath the screen and select 720 resolution. Also, we are going to be taking questions related to the scientific information presented here today. You can submit those questions simply by typing your question into the box below the screen and hitting submit. So with all that said, Tony, you have the floor. Thank you.
All right, Andy, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
All right. So I don't know the makeup of the audience, so this presentation is for somebody with a lot of experience looking into this, as well as someone who is new to it. And you can see the title. This is a classic PowerPoint presentation. I don't know how to get the engineering information across without it. I think you need to see a lot, and there's diagrams in there as well as some video. So anyway, this is an objective look at the collapse of World Trade Center 7 that occurred in New York City on the same day that the Twin Towers went down, September 11, 2001, and we're going to discuss why it is so controversial. So I'm just going to page through the slides. Here's the discussion topics: lack of public knowledge about the building and its collapse, video record of the collapse, effects of the Twin Tower collapses, fires are in World Trade Center 7, what the historic experience with fires and steel frame high rises is, what the Nist investigation concluded, and the problems with their investigation and conclusion. There was a penthouse collapse seconds before the rest of the building. We're going to talk about that and see if that was a separate and distinct event as opposed to part of the overall event. We're going to discuss the fact that the building was in free fall acceleration for the first 8 stories of its collapse and what that pretends, and then come up with give an opinion on what the most likely cause of the collapse was. All right, and I just have these section slides just to say what we're going to talk about next. So many people still don't know the third skyscraper known as World Trade Center 7 or Building 7 or 7 World Trade Center. There was various names for it, but they were all Building 7. That it collapsed to the ground on September 11, 2001 in New York City, right in the same vicinity as the towers. So you see here the silhouettes of the 3 buildings that collapsed. You can see the 2 towers. They're in that one block. Building 7 is across Vesey Street. It was 350 feet from the closest tower, which was the North Tower, the second tower that collapsed. And it was a pretty big building. Saying here it was an enormous 610-foot tall, 47-story building. Each floor had the area of a football field. The plan was a football field in size. Its volume was 75% that of the Empire State Building. So you can see a 10-story building here, and you can see Building 7 in the background. It's quite a difference. The contrast is tremendous. It was shaped in a trapezoidal way. You can see it was 320-some feet on the long side and 247, the shorter side, and then 144 foot wide. And a football field is roughly 300 by 150. And it was built through and over an electrical substation. You can see on the right that it juts out. It was like the first 2 stories of the back of the building, or the north side of the building. It's the blue overlay in the upper left is the substation footprint, and that was the first 2 stories down there. And again, you see the overlay of the substation, the diagram of the foundation caissons showing they were supported through the Con Ed substation. The substation was essentially, it wasn't a cantilever over the substation. It was built through it. So the substation was essentially like the first 2 stories of the back half, and there was a ramp. And this shows a plan of the columns. There's 82 columns. You see 81, and then there's a 14A on the, that would have been the southwest corner. I guess they added one in and couldn't change the column numbering. And there was 58 on the perimeter and 24 in the central core. And here you can see, just for a contrast, you can see a construction worker walking past one of the columns. This is probably around the 7th or 8th floor when they were building it. All of the columns were W14 wide flange, and some of them, there were build-up columns where they had extra plates welded to the H column. And the design was so robust that prospective tenants were offered the option of removing entire floors to create high bays, and that was done up higher in the building. So here you're just seeing half of the building with these two views. You're looking down the north interior side and then the east interior side. Bear in mind you'd have a south side that was longitudinal and a west side. So you're seeing half of the volume of one floor here. And there's a video record. We're going to show some videos here. And they're pretty short. And I'm going to show these videos over. I don't know if it loads well enough. It looked like there was some lagging there. Let me see. Let's try this real fast. Oh, it still lags. Okay. I think everybody gets the idea. Let's see if this one works better. The next one, this is from the northwest near ground level. Whoop. This one's running pretty good. So you can see the building coming down. Comes down straight for about 70, 65, 60 to 70% of its travel. Then it starts to rotate south. Okay. And we'll show you this one. This is a high shot. This is shot from another building. And you'll see the east penthouse go in. The video seems to be lagging, but you can see it. But it's actually doing a slow motion. It doesn't collapse that slow, but you can see that the core isn't all the way down. The interior is not all the way down when the exterior starts to come down. So that's good to see. And the effects from the Twin Tower collapses, you can see it was 350 feet away. Here's World Trade Center 7. Here's the North Tower, also known as World Trade Center 1. And you can see a large exterior panel coming off probably 60 to 80 feet away from the building. You can see it's quite a ways from the 47-story World Trade Center 7, that debris. And this was a map developed by FEMA, the debris map, and you can see World Trade Center 7 is in the light debris zone of World Trade Center 1. And these are just various pictures taken from the Nist report that show the damage. There's not tremendous damage. This one, the southwest corner, did take some kind of hit, but it wasn't, bear in mind this building is a football field in size. If a corner of your house got chopped, a couple foot chopped out of the corner, it's probably not going to cause the whole house to collapse. And here's the bridge, a walkway bridge from building 6 over to building 7 before the collapses. And here's after the collapse. The World Trade Center 7 would have been on the right. And you can see that's plexiglass, and much of it is still intact. It would have gotten hit here, and you can see it was blown out. There wasn't much over this side. And this is the Nist debris damage estimates from photographs. And they didn't have this lower area here in the southwest corner. They don't have evidence photographically of all those columns. They just have the corner. And they say that their model is somewhere in between because they did it with or without debris damage, and the debris damage is much faster. And they said it's probably in between, indicating they don't have actual evidence. They said 7 columns were severed. That's unlikely. You'd have to have a tremendous hit by like a 10,000-pound item to shear those columns. Those calculations have been done. So this next slide shows other buildings that we all know about that took serious damage. Up in the upper left is the Oklahoma City building. You can see that took a serious bomb blast, or numerous bomb blasts, we don't know. at any rate, you can see probably a third of the building is blasted away, and the thing's still standing. Next to that is a Kobar barracks, same kind of thing. A 5,000-pound bomb blew off the face of the building. It's still standing. The Bankers Trust, the other 4 pictures are from 9/11. Serious damage. Even the lower ones were World Trade Center 6, 3, and 4 respectively. They were massed. They were in the same block with the towers, basically right under them. They took tremendous impact damage, and there was no collapse. Total collapse to the ground type thing. So let's look at what kind of fires. They're saying World Trade Center 7 came down by fire, as that's what the Nist report claims. So let's look at the photographic evidence of fires. Bear in mind that North Tower came down at 10:28 a.m., the second tower that collapsed. The first tower was at like 9:57. North Tower came down, which was closest to Building 7, at 10:28. There is no photographic evidence of any fires in Building 7 before 12:15, an hour and 47 minutes later. Very peculiar, and that I think that's suspicious. So here you go. You're seeing the fires. They don't claim that diesel fuel had anything to do with the fires, as most of the fuel was recovered from the tanks below ground level. FEMA had initially implied or said that, there was a good bit of diesel fuel on the premises, but that would have a low probability of occurrence having caused the collapse. But it turned out they recovered most of that fuel in tanks underground level. Okay. It's another shot just from this report. Here's another shot that shows burned out areas. And this is 412 where they say they collapsed this area here, right under 413, where they say the collapse initiated. So what is our historic experience with fires in steel frame high rises? You can see there's been numerous fires over we've been building high rises since the turn of the last century. And there's been numerous fires, including the North Tower in 1975 had I think the fire on somewhat 6 to 9 floors. There were lower floors, and there was no serious structural damage. And, it was basically a cleanup. It was a 3-hour fire. But these fires were pretty hot. You can see they were quite hot. This one in Crackisville as well. This is in Philadelphia, in my area. I remember this. The building stood. They finally took it down, but it burned for 19 hours. No collapse. The one on the far right is the Interstate Bank building in Los Angeles. That burned for quite some time, for 3.5 hours. There were 5 floors. Were pretty hot. And here's Building 5, World Trade Center 5, right in the World Trade Center complex. You can see the fire during and then after. I mean, there's no sign of a collapse. Some partial collapse of an upper corner that may have been hit by tower debris also. And we've had a number of fires since 9/11, high-rise fires. Here's the Beijing Mandarin Hotel in 2009. See it before, during, and after, and during that's an absolute torch. And you can see afterwards that there was some concrete and there was a lot of steel, and you don't see the steel having collapsed. Here's the Shanghai Flats. A year later, trying to give us another fire like this. And this building had scaffolding around it. The scaffolding didn't even collapse. So this is a Grozny high-rise fire in 2013. You can see during and after. This is a Dubai high-rise fire last year. It was pretty extensive. You can see that on the left, and then you can see the building on the right afterwards. There was a fire testing done on an 8-story steel frame structure in Great Britain in 1995, specifically to understand why steel frame, how they react to fire if there's a chance of collapse. There was no collapses. They did various test scenarios. You can see on the next, they had no fireproofing on the steel. You can see it sagging. Temperatures are up to 1,000 degrees C. But what happens is, in a fire, the amount of energy available at any given time is not enough. There's not enough fuel to heat the large pieces of steel. There's a certain amount of energy you need to heat that steel up to a certain temperature where it's going to lose enough strength to fail, and that generally doesn't happen. on a large scale. But in the case of Building 7, you can see here, the 610-foot tall building with the football field area plan turned into a 5-story rubble pile. You can see that rubble pile is like, towards center, which means it was imploded. Everything was pulled towards the center. That's unique, and it's hard to imagine fire causing that. So let's talk about the Nist report, investigation, and their conclusions. And they say that this steel superstructure collapsed due to fire. What's interesting to note is they say in their report that there was no metallography or metallographic analysis done on the steel from World Trade Center 7 because none of it was salvaged. I thought that was rather shocking when I first read that. This would have been allegedly or purportedly, I guess, the first steel frame high-rise building in history to completely collapse due to fire, and none of the steel was saved. Very strange, in the least. So they say, this chart shows you what they say happened to initiate the collapse. They say these 5 beams, I hope everybody can see my cursor. Can you see it, Andy?
Yes, I can.
Okay, so everybody else should be able to see it. So they say these 5 beams, this is the northeast area of the building, expanded thermally and pushed this girder off its seat at this column, causing that floor area to collapse down in a cascading collapse 8 stories down, causing this column to be unsupported in the north. And they say these girders lost their connections due to thermal expansion for a large number of floors. Under the 13th floor is where they say it started. And of course, they say, that the floor collapsed when this girder fell off its seat and that it cascaded down 8 floors. And that both the north and then the other girders, they say, lost their connections for about 9 floors. And column 79 buckled because of losing lateral support. And that collapsed, and I'm going right to left here, started and, caused column 80 and 81 behind it to collapse, and then there was a progression from east to west then in the interior, and that caused the exterior to be unsupported laterally, causing it to collapse. And these views are from the Nist model with quite a bit of exterior deformation that you don't see in the real collapse. So let's look at the problems with the Nist investigation and their conclusions. There was a fellow at the company that did the work on the erected Building 7 was called Frankel Steel out of Toronto. And this fellow, John Salvarinas, was a project manager, a program manager. And he wrote a paper in 1986. And the reason this is important is because he talked about shear studs being on that girder that's being pushed by those 5 beams. Nist claimed there was no shear studs on it, even though in his paper he showed it. And earlier Nist said most of the beams in girder in their draft report in 2005 were made composite with the slabs for the use of shear studs. Typically the shear studs were 3/4 inches in diameter by 5 inches long, spaced 1 to 2 feet on center. That would correspond with what John Salvarinas said. In 2008, in their final report, Nist said there were no shear studs on that girder. It turned out there was a group that was commissioned to do a study on this in 2009 and 10 called ARUP Engineering for a Con Edison and Aegis Insurance Company lawsuit against the owner of Building 7, and they determined there were shear studs on that girder. So I don't know where Nist was getting the information. There wasn't. And here's a typical installation of shear studs. You can see they're on the top surface of every beam and girder. And the next thing we find in the Nist report is they say this is the girder sitting on its seat at column 79, a back view. And right below the bottom flange of the girder is the seat, which is actually 12 inches wide, and the vertical plate that is welded to the column that it sits on. And Nist said that seat was 11 inches wide in the report at first. When the drawings were released in early 2012, it turned out the seat was 12 inches wide. That's important because the beams framing into it were 53 feet long, and they could only expand 5.5 inches at 600 degrees centigrade. It's about as hot as you could get them. And even then, they couldn't expand more than 5.7 inches ever, because once you get above 654 degrees C, sagging causes them to shorten more than they expand. So they can't get the girder web past a 12-inch seat. So they just said in an erratum that yes, the seat was 12 inches wide. Now that the travel distance, instead of 5.5 inches they claimed earlier, they said it was 6.25, but they didn't explain where they got that extra expansion. So the seat was, they said they just made a mistake, and they transposed the longitudinal with the lateral travel distance. So that's sort of hard to take. The longitudinal distance was 6.25. That's how far the girder sits on the seat. So I don't see how they transpose it. That's what they say they did. So that's sort of, they also, this is a top view of those beams sitting on their seat inside the east side columns, which is the exterior. They claimed they did not consider any expansion of the beams to the east, only to the west to push the girder. And you can see there's clearance here. You can see my cursor right here. There's clearance. These bolts would have broke if 28 shear studs would have broke. 3/4 inch shear studs would have broke like Nist said they did. So then another thing that was, in addition to the seat width being distorted from 12 to 11 inches, the Nist report completely omits stiffeners that are on the end of that girder. They say that this girder was pushed to the west and that its web would be past the seat, and that all the load would be on the flange, and the flange couldn't handle the load in flexure. Well, that's true. But if those stiffeners were there, and you can see them here, and they were found in this assembly drawing of the girder to the column, again, when the drawings were released in early 2012, you can see these stiffeners. They're 18 inches high by 5.5 wide, 3/4 inches thick. And they extend from the web all the way out to the flange, and they're partial height 18-inch high stiffeners. And they would stiffen that flange tremendously. Again, you can see the Nist. This is the Nist model, no stiffeners. Here's the stiffeners in a 3D model. You can also see them in photos. This is a photo that's zoomed in. Here's the stiffeners. This is an actual photo of column 79, and that's the girder in question. Here are the beams framing into that girder. And here's just a little analysis showing that the section module, so the stiffened flange, is 79 times that of the unstiffened flange. This is a cross section looking at the stiffener from the side, and this would be the flange. And the 6.25 inches is the bearing distance of the flange on the seat. And here's the 18-inch high stiffener. So this cross section is significantly stiffer than just an 855 thick flange, 5.25, 5.5 inches wide. This is a finite element analysis showing if the web of the girder with the stiffeners was off the seat, it's very low stress. It's in the 7 to 10,000 range. You can see that. And if it was happening with the girder was at 500 degrees, as Nist stated from their fire simulation, you still have 70% of the steel. If the stress was, the failure would not ensue until a 35,000 psi stress was reached, because that steel was ASTM A572, had a yield strength of 50,000 psi. At room temperature and at 500 degrees, it would still be 35,000. So you can see you're well off of that. You'd have to be up here in the reds. You're down here. So you probably have a 4-to-1 factor of safety, 4 to 5-to-1 factor of safety, even at 500 degrees centigrade with those stiffeners on there. And another thing that Nist, this, like I said, this group ARUP did an analysis. This is a shot of their FEA. They had the stiffeners on the girder, and they also show, if you see here, girder pushed against column 79 western side plate. These are the build-up plates on column 79, and the girder would have been expanded at 500 degrees. It wouldn't get past that build-up plate, so it couldn't be pushed off to the west, as Nist tried to say. They don't explain that. They just assumed that it was able to be pushed to the west. And like I said, they left the stiffeners off, which would prevent the flange from failing to begin with, even if it was pushed further, and they distorted the seat width. In addition to that, here's column 79, here's those build-up plates, and here's the girder would have been snagged on the side of that, on the inside of the build-up plate. But the column has girders coming in from three sides. These are beams coming into the girder, but these are girders coming into the south, these from the west, and this is the northern girder that they said fall off its seat. They try to say that the connections on these, the south and west girders, all failed due to thermal expansion. Pretty hard to have happen, and ARUP's analysis shows they didn't fail. But there's another interesting point in that there was fires on floors 7 through 9, 11 through 13. There was none on floor 10. So you can have thermal expansion failures on floor 10. So what does Nist say? They say the girder at floor 13 pushed column 79 to the east enough under floor 13 to break the one under floor 11, which would have been affected by no fire on floor 10, causing its connection to break. Imagine that, 26 feet down. This girder is pushing that one to break that one. And there's fires on floor 13, but that one didn't break by thermal expansion, according to them. So it's just a mixed up story. Like I said, the ARUP analysis shows none of the girder connections the column 79 would have failed, that they stayed intact. And I'm going to go back and show you that. They say girder 76, 79, this is from the west, remain stable. Okay? That's what they say, all throughout, remain stable. So even if the girder did fall, ARUP did say that it was pulled off to the east instead of pushed off to the west when it cooled. So even if it did fail or fall, it would have hinged the floor. That floor area would have hinged down like this. This would be column 79 here. But the floor area was still connected to the north and east side. And there was double sets of shear studs on the exterior girders, the wind girders. So what happens there, to find out the load, the impact load, you have to know the frequency of that system. And ARUP actually did an analysis. Nist didn't. They just made the assertion that the floor impacted the next floor down and you had a cascading floor collapse. They did not provide an analysis. ARUP did, and then they made a mistake by considering the stiffness of this beam and girder assembly to be infinite by using a point load. That's not true. This beam and girder assembly would deflect, and that's going to change the impact loading significantly. And here you can see there's a natural frequency analysis, the frequency of this beam, or this girder with the 5 beams. The girder over here was just sitting on its seat because it had broke the 2 bolts on the bottom of the girder on the seat. These beams are still connected with their bolts, and there's 3 short lateral support beams connecting this northmost beam to the girder on the exterior. So knowing the natural frequency and the mass of this beam and girder assembly, which is 20,000 pounds, you can find the stiffness, and you need that stiffness then, which you can find, like I said, through this equation, knowing natural frequency and mass. And you can do equations, or like spring equations. The energy is equal to 1/2 kx squared. In this case, the x is the deflection. The potential energy is the energy of the whole mass dropping over 120 inches or so. And ARUP used 3,473,000 inch-pounds. The deflection would be 32.4 inches with that stiffness that I showed here. 6,633 pounds per inch is what this beam and girder assembly would deflect. Well, that's what it would deflect. Each inch, for each 6,633 pounds, it would deflect an inch. And the deflection turns out to be 32.4 inches with that potential energy, working, manipulating the equation to determine deflection based on potential energy, known potential energy, and stiffness. And then finally, you can come back and get the impact force, knowing the stiffness and deflection. And that's about 215,000 pounds To shear the seat at column 79 would require 632,000 pounds. So it's 3 to 1 off, and this amount of energy is somewhat conservative. It's high. So you can see that it's not going to happen. You can't, when that floor, even if it did fall, it wouldn't break through the next floor down. So there's a number of false assumptions used in this World Trade Center 7 report to make its collapse initiation hypothesis seem plausible. That's no shear studs on the girder. We found out that's not true. They claim all the expansion of 53-foot long beams was to the west. That wouldn't be true. If the girder seat they said was 11 inches at first, we found out that wasn't true. They had to admit it. They omitted the girder stiffeners, which would have stopped the flange from failing if the web were to go beyond the seat. The thermally expanded girder they allowed for it to move past the column 79 side plate. ARUP's analysis shows it can't, and even a hand analysis will show that. They claim the west and south girders, column 79, had their connections broken. The ARUP analysis shows they wouldn't be. The northeast floor failure cascades down at least 8 floors in their analysis without any, they show no calculations. The ARUP calculations are an error there, and it shows they wouldn't cascade. You can't break through the next floor. So it seems the Nist report, the basis for it has crumbled. They also, in a return, they had an alternative failure mechanism. They omitted other pertinent structural features. That's these 3 lateral support beams that are there to support the columns on the exterior coming off this northmost beam that's framing into that girder that they say failed. And these are the omitted lateral support beams. You can see this is the Nist analysis in their report. There's no lateral support beams. And you can see they say that northmost beam failed. In buckling and lateral torsional buckling, there's no support beams, and they make a big difference. They would cut down I have a couple analyses here. Here's one with them there. You see, it doesn't buckle. It does buckle here when there's no support beams, but here it just deflects the girder because the beam gets a lot stiffer when you cut down the unsupported length, and it's a function of the square of the unsupported length. So if you cut a 52 or 53-foot long beam down to 13 feet between supports, it's a square of that difference. So it's cutting it into 3. It's 16 times more stiff with the support beams. So something interesting at the beginning of the collapse, as you saw, the east penthouse collapses, and then it's a few seconds later that the rest of the interior starts going down, and then the exterior. So we're wondering what's going on with this east penthouse. Was the rest of the collapse a continuation of that penthouse collapse, or were they separate and distinct events? So let's look at it. Nist looked at this, and there was a kink. This is from the video in the east penthouse, and they removed column 79, and that's fine. They got that kink, but that doesn't tell you where column 79 is moved. Just as easily be removed high in the building as well as down low, and you could get that kink. So that's only indicative of column 79 failure somewhere in the building. Doesn't tell you where. But let's look. The other evidence is that the windows only broke down about 15 stories, and the shock wave was observed to go from top to bottom. So they're saying the collapse started down here, and that caused this. But you get the top to bottom shock wave, and the windows only break down 15 floors. It seems like something's happened at the top, not bottom to top. And there's only daylight visible in the upper windows. The building was 144 feet wide. If that whole east side interior had collapsed, I would think you'd be able to see daylight at least down 5, 6, 7 floors. You don't. It's only up top. And there was no dust emanating when this alleged full east side interior collapse that Nist claims was happening when the east penthouse collapsed. You don't see any dust until the full exterior comes down. That's telling me that it's the east penthouse only collapses up top. Let's look at this video and you'll see. They're saying this whole thing collapsed like this before the exterior collapse. This is the interior, because they're talking about core columns here. So let's look at this video. They're going to do a close-up. And watch when it comes down. You don't see the dust until the exterior comes down. If the whole interior on the east side had been collapsing, you'd have seen dust come out of those windows during that time. In addition, there should have been deformation of the east side exterior. There's not until the whole thing comes down. It never really deforms on the outside. So we're asking here, how can the core have been completely collapsed before global collapse? Again, this is interior core collapse. This is Nist words here. This is the core. They're saying that's what happened for the exterior. Now let's watch this video and see if you think the core collapsed before the building. I'll play this again and then I'll show you some other slides too. Okay, so now we're gonna, I have to get out of this mode, Andy, and go to, I have some slides to show. So I hope everybody can see this.
And I'll just say that while Tony's getting that up, we're getting some really excellent questions coming in. We want to encourage you, especially if you are a building professional, to please go ahead and keep on submitting them.
That's right. We want to hear a lot of questions. All right. Well, I'm going to show these slides. I can do this. These are thumbnails, and you can do it when you just scroll it. You can do it in slow motion. So you can see, I want you to see, I'm moving the thumb wheel. You can see, there you go. The whole interior is not collapsed before the exterior starts moving. You can see it. The exterior, see, the exterior is going down before the interior is fully collapsed. There's the interior, and the exterior has already started coming down. See, the exterior is coming down. The interior is not fully collapsed. So that's important to see. Okay, and we're going to go back to the full screen. All right, so the video shows this video here. Again, it's real quick. And that's what I just showed you the separate slides from. It shows the screen wall in the east-west penthouse. And the screen wall is an area before the west penthouse, between the east and the west. I've just started moving a fraction of a second before the exterior. And they aren't even below the roof line before the full exterior comes down symmetrically. The only sound answer for window breakage only observed at the top of the building, shockwave observed travel top to bottom, daylight only observed at very upper stories, dust only being observed coming from windows after the exterior falls on the east side, is that the east penthouse fell only a few stories into the top of the building, with the east side interior being largely intact until the full building collapsed. And that's what I believe happened. I believe the entire core was intact except for the very top of the east side, and that the core was taken out over 8 stories, something like that. And that's why you got a symmetric collapse, when that core collapsed and pulled all the exterior columns in. And we get, there was in 2008, a high school physics teacher from California named David Chandler discovered that World Trade Center 7 was in full free fall acceleration for about 2.5 seconds at the beginning of its collapse. The Nist model of the collapse only accelerates at about 60% of free fall acceleration. Nist was confronted with this fact during their August 2008 draft report briefing. David was able to ask that question and forced to admit to it in their final report released in November 2008. They did not address the implications of the free fall, nor did they change their model or conclusion. So that's interesting. Well, one has to realize, to reach full gravitational acceleration or free fall, all of an object's potential energy must be being converted to kinetic energy or motion. None of it is available to perform other work, such as crushing or deforming steel and concrete. So some other mechanism must be providing that energy for the structure to fall through itself at free fall. Again, it was in free fall for 8 stories, and they admit to that, but they don't address the implications. And they changed David's 2.5 to 2.25 seconds. That's not significant. Now, here's a video, like I said, that you don't see the deformation in the real video that you see in the Nist model, which is more as of the natural. They have things failing across the floor and they get all this deformation. So let's look at it. This is a 2-minute video that shows the contrast both. And I hope it plays fast enough. Here's the real video. I don't see this kind of deformation there. There is a kink in the north face. That would have happened when the core was taken down. The descent is basically symmetrical. And here's the Nist model. They did two models, one with and without debris damage. And you're going to see they're going to start their failure is going to start in this area, where they say it started when that girder was pushed off its seat. That couldn't happen if they didn't omit certain structural features. And they're showing this whole east side coming down, but you don't see any dust coming out of the windows. Very peculiar. I think just the penthouse collapsed up here and all the core columns didn't come down, the whole exterior came down. That's what they're saying happened. Doesn't seem to make sense. Okay. So the way they say the exterior came down is rather unique. They say the interior columns buckled across the building. The exterior columns were left laterally unsupported, and that the exterior column buckling spread column to column sequentially as the loads were redistributed. That this happened over 2 seconds. I'm going to look at this video. 2 seconds at free fall is over 64 feet, or about 5 stories. So if that were true, if it would start on one corner of the building, that would start coming down first rather than the other. But it looks very symmetric. It's even with the horizon. I mean, I just can't buy their story. Looking at this video and others like it. We'll play this one more time, and I think everybody would get the idea. It's simultaneous. That can only be done with charges. So what is the most likely cause of the collapse of World Trade Center 7? So as I showed, the President Nist report explanation for the collapse, the building consists of a series of impossible occurrences, especially if you put the items in that they omitted that should have been there that were structurally significant. Fires could not have caused the observed symmetrical free fall collapse of the building of the full length and width. And this is why those who have looked at it honestly, including engineering professors, have stated the following. And I have quotes here from Hugo Bachmann and George Schneider, who are both they're a professor emeritus for structural engine analysis and construction at the Swiss Federal Institute of Technology. And they said this quite some time ago when they first saw actual footage of those buildings coming down. So what is the problem with the collapse of World Trade Center 7 was the result of controlled demolition? Well, the charges could not have been set on September 11, 2001, and there was fires in the building. They would have to have been pre-positioned. This would indicate the collapse was a planned event and not the result of random damage due to unforeseen events such as aircraft hijackings, impacts, and the Twin Tower collapses. There was a legendary prosecutor, Vincent Bugliosi, that some might remember. He's the one that prosecuted Charles Manson. He prosecuted 22 murder trials and never lost one. He wrote a book in 2008 that showed in no uncertain terms that the Bush-Cheney administration lied to the public to go to war in Iraq. If that is true, then what basis would there be to take what they said about 9/11 at face value, especially in light of the serious problems found with the reports? So there's been some recent examinations of Building 7 by some professors. There's a couple peer-reviewed papers here that I list, and I think we can give out the links to these. They're not lengthy papers. They're very well done, 7 to 10 pages each that anybody interested you can find. They're free access on the internet. And that's pretty much it, Andy.
Okay, thank you, Tony. We got a lot of questions coming in. Actually, one that just came into the inbox here asked, can we find this to watch it again? This is actually going to be archived at AE 911 Truth YouTube page. It's also going to be archived right here on this website, or web page rather, AE 911 Truth www.ae911truth.org/webinars after the webinar concludes today. If you're unable to find the link, you can always email me too at asteele@ae911truth.org. So Tony, I want to thank you for doing this. The first question I'm seeing here asks, what does Nist say about the effects of the fall of WTC1 on causing Building 7 to come down?
They did an analysis with and without debris damage. And they say it came down a little faster with the debris damage. But the problem there is that debris damage was mostly just in the southwest corner. And they have no photographic evidence. They claim that 7 columns were sheared, but it'd be pretty hard to do that. To shear those columns, they were quite hefty. They were W14 by, I think, 665s. You'd have to have like a 10,000-pound item hit it at the sweet spot to sever it and travel 350 feet and be moving at about 49, 50 miles an hour. Pretty difficult. It's probably unlikely that much damage was there. And in the transcript, Shyam Sunder said the actual thing was probably between the debris and no debris models, indicating to me they have no evidence of 7 columns being severed. There was certainly a corner column or 2 severed there. You can see it in photographic evidence. That is very unlikely to have caused what we see. And we see a symmetric collapse. We do not see a tilting collapse to one side. And, one corner of a large building like that, there's redundancy. There was spandrel. There was wind girders that would spread the load to other columns. So it wasn't. It's only significant in the time that it took in their model. And then they don't have evidence for that many columns being severed. So.
Okay. The next question asks, is the Nist report admitting that the fires were only on a few floors and not a raging inferno?
They don't get into whether it was a raging. If they just say that the fire caused this much heating, they don't get into adjectives like raging inferno that I've seen or anything like that. They said they were consistent long-term fires, 7 hours. But the problem is they do admit that the fires would only last, in some places 20 to 30 minutes or 30 to 40 minutes in any one area and then move on. And that's really why steel frame structures don't come down. You don't have enough energy in one spot to heat the large structural items enough. It's an energy problem. Okay. It's not whether it gets hot for a minute or so. You need enough energy. If you put something in the oven, it takes time to heat up. It's the same thing with the steel. It's a specific heat issue. You need so much energy per unit mass to heat at each degree. If that amount of energy, if the steel is massive, you need enough energy to heat the whole thing, because it's also going to transfer. It's a metal. It transfers heat rather well. So if you don't have enough energy in the fire, you're not going to be able to heat the steel enough to weaken it to where it's going to fail. And that's really the reason these buildings don't come down. There's not enough fuel in office fires to heat the massive structure to the point of failure.
Okay, our next question asks us about structural engineers. What have practicing structural engineers said about this presentation? And I'm going to expand that, because obviously this is the first time we've had this presentation, to mean about the information that AE911 Truth is putting forth. And I'll just answer, representing AE, that we have almost 200 structural and civil engineers that have signed our petition, and just as many structural and civil engineering students. So, Tony, I'll let you comment on that too.
Yeah, this is generally anybody that's looked at it, this is what you find. And I'm a mechanical engineer. I do structural analysis and design and analysis on machinery and equipment. So for rugged environments, aerospace type environments, it's the same science used in building design. For stress and materials, everybody that looks into it, this is what you find, and it's impossible. It just couldn't happen the way they're trying to say it happened.
Okay, our next question asks, if it was one beam that collapsed, causing the building to fall, should not the collapse have been asymmetrical?
Well, of course. Okay, and that's another reason when you see it collapse symmetrically, the whole thing, it's hard to appreciate this, what they're saying, this almost far-fetched, that it started in this one area and progressed north to south and then east to west, and just the interior, then the exterior was a hollow shell, and then came down on its own symmetrically. Why wouldn't you get, if it did start on the east and the interior came down, why wouldn't the east side start deforming when the east side interior came down? It doesn't. It waits for the west side and comes down with it. That's not legitimate. And anybody being honest would say that.
Okay, and the next one is more of a comment that was made at some point in the presentation. I'm not exactly sure, so you can guess at this, Tony, and comment on it if you want to. It just says, note the required minimum steel strength from the specified strength is always less than the actual strength of materials that are transported to a job site.
That's not true. What's the minimum strength of 836 is 36,000. Usually what you'll get in many cases is 1.1 times that. So somewhere around 39,000. And that's true by testing. It's a minimum strength given. ASTM A572, which is what the steel in World Trade Center 7 in those areas was, is a 50,000 minimum yield. I would suspect the actual yield strength was somewhere in the 54 to 55,000 PSI range. It's not less. That's a minimum to meet spec, so it can't be less. That's not a nominal. It's a minimum.
Okay, our next question asks, if there was no dust coming out of the windows as the core collapsed, how could there be explosives? If the core didn't collapse first, how can the exterior be collapsing due to explosives if not being broken up by explosives?
It's hard to understand that question. There was, what I was saying with no dust coming out is the interior, the east side interior could not be collapsing, as Nist said, from the bottom to the top, if you're not seeing any dust coming out the windows. They're saying the east side interior came down before the exterior of the whole thing. The east side interior, and then it went east to west. But you don't see any dust until the whole building comes down. So it couldn't be that the east side interior collapsed and then the west side and then the building comes down. The east side interior had to still be there, is what I'm saying. And that what it looks like is 8 stories of the core were removed. That would have pulled the exterior columns inward, causing high eccentricity, and they would have buckled under their own load with virtually no resistance over 8 stories. If it's being pulled inward at 8 stories, somewhere down low in the building, say between floors 14 and 21 or 22, there was no fire on most of those floors. There may have been explosives there. And another thing to bear in mind is that it looks like the fires in Building 7 were due to arson. There's no photographic evidence of any fire in that building until an hour and 47 minutes after the North Tower went down, the World Trade Center 1. Now, when you look at it, the fires in World Trade Center 1 were over 4 to 6 floors. That's fine. We admit that. But now when that building started to collapse, the gypsum and concrete dust would have been choking that fire there. And you had limited floors on fire. For hot embers or structural members to fly from that, just that one small area of the North Tower, 350 feet, and break into the World Trade Center 7 over 10 floors and start fires that nobody sees for an hour and 47 minutes, strains credulity. Okay? And there were people in that building. And it looks like those fires might have been set by arson. And if there were charges, you could have set the fires on floors where there were no charges. So this could have been orchestrated.
Okay. The next question asks, if WTC 7 was in free fall for 2.5 seconds, and that supposedly indicates controlled demolition, what about for the rest of the collapse, which was not at free fall? Was that not controlled demolition?
Well, of course it was, but the free fall was done to get overkill so they could get the momentum generated to crush the rest of the building. That's how controlled demolitions are done. You take out a certain amount of the structure to get momentum going and then use the structure to crush itself. So this was a 610-foot tall building. They took out 8 stories out of 47 to get the thing moving at somewhere around 60 miles an hour after that 8-story free fall. And, you know, you're talking about an enormous amount of momentum that would then crush the rest of the building. The point is, when you're in the free fall, you can't be doing any other work. The upper section cannot be doing any other work. So something else is removing the 8 stories. It couldn't be the falling building during that time. After that, it would be the upper section crushing the lower end itself.
Okay.
Once it engages, I should say.
Next question asks, can you elaborate on Nist not releasing the data for World Trade Center 7?
Yeah, well, I think they don't release the data because they can't show, you know, this walk-off. As you see, ARUP, when they did it, that girder was trapped by the side plate on column 79. Well, Nist, how's Nist going to get out of that? But they're exposed now. They're just stonewalling now. The cat's out of the bag. We know that what they're saying couldn't possibly be true, and they're just not saying anything about it. They're refusing to talk about it.
Right, and the reason they cited was that somehow releasing this data for a building that no longer exists would somehow jeopardize
public safety. Right, they said that to a structural engineer, Ron Brookman, from the Central California area. He wrote them a while back in 2009 or 10, asking for analysis and calculations on this alleged walk-off. And the NIST director came back and said that they're not going to release that because it might jeopardize public safety. Now this, you know, this is silly on its face.
Right, and actually this goes into another question. Are they admitting then that in order for any tall building to be brought down on purpose, it most likely would take a lot of inside knowledge and not random office fires to do that? So,
yeah, well, they don't. They try to say there's no evidence for controlled demolition.
Our next question. Oh, go ahead.
Well, I'm just saying there's massive evidence for controlled demolition. The dynamic behavior of the building is absolute evidence for controlled demolition. They don't acknowledge it. They acknowledge the free fall. But they don't address the implications.
Okay, the next question asks, why is there no no sound of explosives? If there were explosives, they would have been picked up on dozens of videos of the collapses of World Trade Center 7. Richard Gage said the reason was that cameras were too far away. That is where cameras are for recording controlled demolitions. Right.
The other thing is that the microphones used by like the networks and people like that they're near field microphones. You need a high gain microphone, the type that would be real long. People have probably seen them, to get sound from a distance. David Chandler, this physicist that determined the building was in free fall, did some video and audio analysis, and he shows that there are actually, Banfield was interviewing a girl, and there is you can hear some sounds that certainly sound like explosions in the background, even on her near field microphone. So just because you can't see them, first of all, they'd have been internal in the core. You're not going to see the explosions externally. Secondly, the sound would have been dampened by the fact that they were only in the core. And thirdly, like I said, the microphones are near field.
Okay, our next question asks, the FDNY looked at World Trade Center 7 and predicted that it was going to collapse. When they could see it was close to collapse, they created a collapse cordon around it and moved everyone away from it. Why was this not mentioned in the presentation?
No, that's not true. The FDNY determined it was going to collapse. An engineer from Rudy Giuliani's Office of Emergency Management said it was going to collapse in about 5 hours. At 1 o'clock, 4 or 5 hours, he said. And this was alluded to by Shyam Sunder, the lead NIST investigator. The FDNY then reacted to that by stopping any firefighting activity they had and creating a safety zone, an exclusion zone around the building, and waiting for it. And they were saying it was either going to be brought down or come down on its own. That's on tape. So how would they say it was going to be brought down? How could it be brought down? The firefighters on tape saying that I think Aaron Brown from CNN. So now the FDNY did not predict that it was going to come down on its own. They were told that, and they agreed. They didn't know.
And Tony, I'm drawing a blank on where the fires scattered. Were the fires in the area where the collapse was supposed to have initiated at that point yet?
Well, the fire said it looks like from photographic evidence that the fires were already out, where Nist says the collapse would have initiated. Now, ARUP says that the girder could have come off during cooling, and that's fine. But then it's unlikely that girder could have come off. You'd need a huge amount of sagging in the beams. And ARUP heated things up to 700 to 800 degrees centigrade, which is unlikely. Again, even if the girder came off, it couldn't break through the floors. Additionally, column 79, you only need 2 girders supporting the column, one in each of 2 orthogonal directions, just like a corner column. So even if you lost the north side support, it wouldn't matter if you had it from the south and the west. And the ARUP analysis shows those connections can't break. They half-heartedly try to say, well, there's a stress razor on the welds, but that would have been, and they use fracture mechanics. But fracture mechanics, you need a large number of cycles. You wouldn't have had a lot of cycles. Fatigue cracks grow at a very slow rate. So it's very unlikely that the connections of the south and west girders would have been broken at column 79. And in addition to that, even if the girder came off on one floor, you couldn't break through the other floors. And column 79 could take at least 5 stories without being laterally supported. It's so unlikely that this column was left unsupported and then enough to buckle. It's almost ridiculous. And the fact that we're arguing about it it's almost silly. And then the only reason, Nist doesn't want to talk about it. They just say we stand by our work and that's it, period. It'll jeopardize public safety. They will not talk about it right now. It's a shame because what they're saying couldn't possibly happen.
And our last question today asks about the missing building features. And have you communicated with Nist regarding that? Yes,
and a letter was sent by a prominent attorney, Dr. William Pepper, who represented the Martin Luther King family in their trial in Memphis. And they sued a fellow for conspiracy in that murder of Martin Luther King. William Pepper, wrote a letter to the Office of the Inspector General of the Department of Commerce, and we had an analysis showing the omitted features with finite element analysis showing that if they were included, what Nist said couldn't happen. And Nist came back and again said they looked at the assertions and they don't agree with them and they stand behind their work. They didn't discuss it. It's really sad what we're seeing here. We're living in a la-la land and we're not allowed to discuss it.
Okay, I want to thank everybody for tuning in. We had a record number of people today. With these webinars go on every Sunday, and sometimes Thursdays each week. So if you want to see other people such as Richard Gage and other guest presenters, please tune in, pass these on to others that you know as well, and especially with building professionals. And you're going to say,
is there couple more things I could show real quick?
Certainly.
While we're in this discussion mode, I guess I have to, let me see if I can bring this up. It's real quick. I just want to show that Larry Silverstein is going around and saying that the antenna from the North Tower hit Building 7. And you need to see that, him saying that, and then I'll show you how the North Tower had to go completely away from it. All right, you see him saying that, and now I'm going to show you the antenna went the opposite direction. Building 7's here. This is the north side, and you're going to see the antenna go to the southeast. It doesn't even come in the direction of Building 7. All right, so this is the kind of silliness we're being fed. The owner of this building is actually going out saying the antenna hit World Trade from the North Tower hit World Trade Center 7, and right on video it shows you it went the opposite way. and there's 350 feet between the buildings anyway. That antenna was 500 feet away from World Trade Center 7. There's one more thing I want to show real quick, and that is, let's see where it's at. I guess I can, oh, it's right in here. The false about no water. The reason given, they said they didn't fight the fires after this engineer said it was going to collapse and they created the exclusion zone. The reason given in this World Trade Center 7 report for the fires not being fought, World Trade Center 7, is that the building used city water mains to charge a sprinkler system on floors 1 through 20, and it had tanks up above on the 46th floor that handled the sprinklers and standpipes from the 21st to 46th floor. But they're saying the water mains on the street were broken by the Twin Tower collapses. That may be true. We don't know. But that reason is poor since there were 3 fireboats just 400 yards away in the Hudson River all afternoon. Each of those were capable of pumping 19,000 gallons of water per minute. World Trade Center 7 had 3 of these large Siamese fittings on 3 different sides of these, one each on each of 3 sides of the building. They didn't even need to enter the building. The sprinkler system could have been charged from the outside. In addition to that, this is in the Nist report at 1:30 p.m. That's water. That's probably coming from the fireboats. Okay, so there was water flow there. So it appears the fires were not fought to the firefighters being led to believe the building would collapse. Yet Nist claims the rare circumstances involved in the collapse did not come together until just before the collapse. So how anybody could have predicted it is beyond me, and I just wanted to show those couple things.
Well, thank you for that, actually. Those are excellent additions there. So we are going to conclude the webinar now. I want to thank everybody for tuning in, for the excellent questions. You're going to be able to watch this in the archive at ae911truth.org/webinars. Also, for any building professionals that may be in the audience right now, you can download a copy of our latest booklet, Beyond Misinformation, right off of this page. The PDF is free. You can also watch our film, 9/11 Explosive Evidence Experts Speak Out. The link should be right here on this page. Again, you can watch that for free from that link too. So thank you very much, and we are done. Have a great day.